Mr. Bison flips! Mr. Bison flips! Mr. Bison flips! Mr. Bison flips!
Welcome to this exploration of Hamlet Act IV. I'm merely going to give you a core skeleton of what is a really interesting act, but at least it gives an entry point into exploring it. It's an interesting act because we finally get all that action we've been waiting for. So really we kind of building up tension and thinking and talking about action all the way through Acts 1, 2 and 3, and finally Act 4 is when things come to fruition and things start to actually happen. So Act 4 consists of 7 scenes. Some of them are very short. It's very fast paced because it's very action heavy. So obviously in Act 1, 2 and 3 we were building tension, we were considering action, we were contemplating actions, and we were potentially putting off and procrastinating about the action. And then finally, after the play within the play and the resolve that Hamlet shows in the subsequent soliloquy, we've sort of unleashed that spring and we've started the downward spiral with the actual action of the play, heading towards the denouement in Act 5. And really, I mean, with the killing of Polonius, obviously, we started the action and we get a lot of it in this act as well. To some extent, it almost becomes a bit silly. The pace does drop down momentarily in scene 4 when Hamlet gets to do his final soliloquy, which is a response to Fortinbras's passing through the land. But other than that, the act moves quite quickly. So scene 1 is really brief, and really it's just to allow Gertrude the space to come in and announce to Claudius that yes, my son must completely have lost his mind, and he's killed the dear old Polonius. And Claudius's reaction to that, the first response he gives is, "Oh, it had been so with us had we been there." So clearly he's not at all showing much pity for Polonius, or remorse, or even worry about Hamlet, but rather he's worried about the fact that had he been there, he would have been the one killed. And so he orders Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to go off and find the body of Polonius. Scene 2 is really just about Hamlet's relation with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He plays with them once again. It's building on the ideas that we saw in Act 2, Scene 2, where he described man as the quintessence of dust, because when they ask him where's the body, he says, well, it's compounded with dust whereto it's kin, and so it's going back to the dust that it's been. And then Hamlet attacks Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and particularly Rosencrantz, for his sycophantic nature. Rosencrantz doesn't understand this. He says, I have no idea what you're talking about. But Hamlet says, so he calls Rosencrantz a sponge, and Rosencrantz is a bit confused by this and says, "Call you me a sponge, my lord?" And Hamlet responds, "Aye, sir, that sucks up the king's countenance, his rewards, his authorities. When he needs what you have gleaned, it is but squeezing you, sponge, you shall be dry again." So scene 3 again picks up where the others have left off. So you can see how all of these scenes are continuing straight on from Act 3, Scene 4, with the closet scene, and we haven't really had any time elapsed between that and Scene 1, 2 and 3. We're just continuing on. So now Hamlet, despite having made fun of his friends, comes along and goes to see Claudius, who again asks, where's the body, in Scene 3. And again we see that echo of the bleakness that we've seen in Hamlet's speech in Act 2, Scene 2, where he describes the stale promontory, the congregation of vapours, and man as a quintessence of dust. It explores to some extent class and equality, and it's interesting because Hamlet's kind of trying to undermine the authority of the king, yet in the previous scene when he did that sponge speech, he's actually saying, how dare you speak to me like that to Rosencrantz. So it's sort of, in one scene he asserts himself as having status, and then the next scene he's trying to undermine someone else's. So there's something funny going on here with class issues. Once again, Hamlet insults Claudius. In his status as king, he's trying to show that he is equal to a beggar. And eventually, by the end of the scene, Claudius declares that Hamlet will be sent off to England because we can't have you here. We want you to go off and get well. And then, at the very end of the scene, Claudius uses almost like a soliloquy where he reveals that he's going to ask the English king to kill Hamlet for him. So in this scene, Hamlet stresses the way that death can equalize status and class. Claudius asks him, "Where's Polonius?" And Hamlet says, "Well, he's at supper, but not a supper where he eats, but where he is eaten." A certain convocation of political worms are even at him. "Your worms, your only emperor for diet. We fat all creatures to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. For your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service, 2 dishes to 1 table, and that's the end." And he continues that a bit later on in the scene. He's saying that a man may fish with a worm that has eaten of a king, and eat of the fish that has fed on that worm, to show you how a king may go on a progress through the guts of a beggar. So obviously, when he's talking about Claudius to Claudius here, that's quite condescending towards the king. So Claudius again stresses, "Where is Polonius?" And Hamlet essentially tells him to go to hell. He says, "He's in heaven. Send thither to see. If your message find him not there, then seek him in the other place yourself." So that's kind of where you're going, so you might as well go there and look for poor old Polonius. But indeed, if you don't find him there, you're going to smell him when you go up the stairs into the lobby. So in scene 4, we get the arrival of Fortinbras back on stage. It's the first time we actually see him on stage, even though we've talked about him throughout the play. And he's obviously, as we know, now passing through from Norway down the Swedish coast, presumably, across past Elsinore Castle, over the Danish Sounds, and then down through Germany to Poland, where he's going to go off and fight. Presumably a feat that's possible. About 50 years after Shakespeare's time, one of the Swedish kings did go over the ice to take on the Danish king in a battle. So if this is winter time, I guess it's possible from a geographical standpoint, even though this movement doesn't make much sense. So Fortinbras passes through, and he's actually acting very courteous and respectful towards Claudius. He says, he sends one of his generals in, or his captain rather, to ask for permission and sort of to pay his respect to the king, showing either that either Horatio's and Claudius's evaluation of him back in Act 1 was faulty, or that he's actually changed his personality, that he's moved on from being that choleric, fiery, rash character to someone who's actually now more somber and sober. Fortinbras leaves the stage. Hamlet has a quick conversation with his captain, and they talk about how war is really futile because they're going off to Poland and they're going to fight over land that isn't big enough to host the battle, nor is it big enough to bury all the dead afterwards. And as the captain moves away, Hamlet is left to deliver his last soliloquy in the play, "How all occasions do inform against me," in which he deliberates over the meeting he's just had with Fortinbras. How all occasions is an interesting and often overlooked soliloquy. It is maybe a bit less poetic than some of the others, but the ideas in it are certainly worth exploring. It's a reaction, obviously, to Fortinbras's passing through the land, and it does echo, firstly, what a rogue and peasant slave, because Hamlet is comparing himself to someone else, showing how he's inferior. Remember, he was comparing himself to the players, and the players' impersonation of Hecuba in Act 2, and now he's comparing himself to Fortinbras. And it also echoes the final resolve that he walks away with in "'Tis Now the Very Witching Time of Night," where he's sort of finally pledging, "I'm going to see blood flow in recompense for my father's demise." And it also brings back a great deal of the imagery from earlier in the play, that of sickness, and the idea of beasts and beasts having discourse, etc. So we'll come back and look at this speech in greater length in class, obviously, and you should revisit it on your own as well. But essentially, he's seeing that all occasions inform against him and spur his revenge on. He really needs to get this revenge happening. And then he starts reflecting on what is a man again, and the fact that that man is really just a beast, and the beast with wanting discourse is something we've heard before in the very first soliloquy, when he described Gertrude, and how the beast would have mourned the loss of his father longer. But here he's talking about the capability that God gave us, the capability to reason, but that maybe he himself is doing that too much, and therefore he's thinking too precisely on the event, and therefore he's not taking action. I do not know why yet I live to say these things to do. So he's contemplating too much. He's not taking action, rather than, as Fortinbras has just demonstrated, just marching off with this mass and charge, being a delicate and tender prince, knowing that he's off to fight a battle that's really just for the land, worth as much as an eggshell. And so again, as he talked about before, back in "Oh, What a Rogue and Peasant Slave," he uses polysyndeton in this case to strengthen the fact, to kind of strengthen the accretion of reasons why he ought to act. That he has both the cause and the will and the strength and the means to take action. So repeating that "and" between each noun there really emphasizes how he ought to take action. Or more exactly, whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, and which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. And then we end in the couplet, apostrophe and the couplet, to conclude the scene, and also to again express that resolve and the decision, I'm going to take action. So from this forth, this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth, which we have to imagine is rhyming, even though it's more of an I rhyme than an actual end rhyme. In scene 5, again, we get a fair bit of action. We first have Horatio coming to tell Gertrude that really you need to have a word with Ophelia because her mental stability is really suffering, and eventually Gertrude allows admittance to Ophelia and finds out that sure enough, yes, she has lost her mind. And then Claudius comes in and witnesses the same thing and thinks it's a sad thing when a young maid's wits are this weak. We then have, they hear a funny noise, and in storms Laertes, along with a crowd of people who all shout out that Laertes ought to be the king, not Claudius, because Laertes is honest. And then eventually Claudius manages to calm everyone down, send them off, and says, I want to talk to Laertes, and he convinces him that I had nothing to do with killing your father, and I have nothing to do with the fact that your sister is losing her wits, and let me tell you exactly what has happened. So this brief monologue comes from the comes in between the exit of Ophelia when she leaves, where we've realized that yes, she is crazy, but before the arrival of Laertes. In fact, it's prefaced on the end here with the noise within. That is Laertes knocking on the door with his men to come and demand Claudius's. Claudius gives him room on the throne. but it's an interesting monologue to have a quick look at. Because first of all, Claudius starts with the phrase, "When sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions." So we don't just get one piece of trouble, but when they start coming, when it rains, it pours, essentially, of troubles. And we'll see that later on. Gertrude, when she comes in to announce Ophelia's death, she again uses a similar phrase. She says, one woe treads upon another's heels. We've had one problem, and here comes another one. We then get this fairly lengthy section describing why Ophelia might have lost her wits, because all of these things, all this emotional trauma has occurred to her. But then he ends again with the words that echo really what Hamlet has already said to us twice, first in Act 1, Scene 2, and then also in Act 4, Scene 4, which we just looked at, where he's saying that she's lost, or she's been divided from her judgment, and without judgment we are pictures or mere beasts. So again, that a man without his reasoning is really, or his discourse as Hamlet uses, is a mere beast. And then we also get the continuation of the ear imagery, where we talked before. We've described Claudius as a mildewed ear, and we've had daggers enter into Gertrude's ears, and we've had a few other ear references. And here he says he's going to find Laertes when he comes, because he knows he's secretly arrived, and when he finds him, he's going to infect his ear. No, sorry, my mistake. His ear is currently being infected by pestilent speeches, and so I need to have a word with him to set him straight. Scene 6 is a really brief one. It's just a messenger coming into Horatio, giving him a letter which contains other letters, and the letters from Hamlet outlining how when he went on the boat with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they were attacked by pirates, and Hamlet got excited and boarded the pirate boat on his own, and then his own boat drove off, and he was taken prisoner by the pirates, but they then realized, oh, this is not a good thing, and they brought the prince back to Denmark safely. And he wants Horatio to take some letters to Claudius, and he also promises that he's going to tell him lots of things, including what's happened to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern when he returns to Denmark shortly, or to Elsinore shortly. And then finally we have Scene 7, which again is full of action and events occurring. Firstly, we have Claudius convincing Laertes that he needs to kill Hamlet, and he says, I can't do it myself because Gertrude loves Hamlet too much, and obviously I love Gertrude, and therefore I can't kill her son. And then Hamlet's letter arrives announcing that he's returned naked to Denmark and wishes to have a chat with Claudius. And that word naked is kind of interesting. Obviously it can have to do with the fact that he's been robbed by the pirates, but it could also show maybe that he's reborn, because he does come in the next scene and proclaims himself as, this is I, Hamlet the Dane. So maybe he's kind of, this nakedness is actually the newborn, the rebirth of Hamlet. Or it could show a kind of a fragile and vulnerable Hamlet that's returning. He then compliments Laertes on his swordsmanship and sets up the plan of poisoning the swords and poisoning the chalice, so that they can be certain that Hamlet will not survive the upcoming swords play. And he asked Laertes, how sure are you in this? How much did you love your father? How much do you want to do this? And Laertes declares that I would cut his throat in the church if it was necessary, which is obviously interesting for us. So again, a bit of dramatic irony here, because we know that Hamlet refused to kill Claudius while he was praying back in Act 3, Scene 3. We then get the death of Ophelia announced by Gertrude, and she uses the words that I described before, that one woe follows on another's heels. And what's kind of interesting here as well is the way that Laertes responds to these news. He says, "Too much of water hast thou already, poor Ophelia, and therefore I forbid my tears." So I'm not going to cry, I'm instead going to avenge you, because you don't need any more tears, any more water poured on you if you've already drowned. So that brings to a close the fourth act, which is an act, obviously, as we've seen, of humour, of gruesomeness, of a bit of violence, of madness as well as death of Ophelia, and pirates, and safe returns, and all these things, all this action coming to fruition finally. And obviously this prepares us now for going into Act 5 and Hamlet's return to the gravedigger scene.